Well, committee, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Today on our agenda, we have committee. You may note that there will be some minutes emailed out to you to look for approval. Should be 3 sets coming fairly quickly. Today we have a hearing on House Bill 2007. Adam, can you give us a briefing?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2007 is a bill requested by the Kansas Corporation Commission. The bill provides comprehensive changes to motor carrier laws and certain changes to the KCC's regulation of motor carriers. Going through the bill, Section 1 provides that motor carriers may be served with decisions by the KCC electronically if the authorized by the motor carrier. Sections 2 through 7, 10, and 12 would update and repeal provisions that no longer apply for motor carrier licensing and regulation or are otherwise preempted by federal law. Sections 8, 9, and 11 would repeal provisions related to KCC's administrative hearing process upon a motor carrier applying to operate in Kansas. Generally, this would apply to motor carriers operating in intra-state commerce, trying to obtain a certificate of convenience and necessity or a certificate of public service. These would be generally if they've been denied. The KCC currently has the authority to hold the hearing, but the process of how they go through it would now go through the Kansas Administrative Procedure Act rather than kind of the act or how it's spelled out in the statute. It would go through kind of the uniform process. And then lastly, Section 13 would repeal kind of several sections that deal with motor carriers assigning or transferring their certificates to another motor carrier and disallowing a motor carrier from abandoning or changing their service without getting consent from the KCC. Also has repeals the statute dealing with procedures for occasional or temporary trips and trucks and tractors to the state. So it's my understanding a lot of these sections are now obsolete and have been obsolete for many years. I believe KCC should be able to touch base more on kind of what's gone on and why these statutes no longer are needed. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Committee questions. Senator Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Adam, on that Section 8, 9, and 11, changing over to the Kansas Administrative Procedure Act, how did they, under what procedures did they conduct their hearings prior to that? And maybe that's a question for one of the people who was giving testimony.
I'll probably let Mr. Haney, I believe he's the one who will be speaking to it. They did have kind of their own spelled out procedure in statute. It also kind of references the Administrative Procedure Act. I'll let him talk more about that if you don't mind, about what the kind of the prior process is and why they're going to the KAP, the Kansas Administrative Procedure Act process.
And just as kind of a general question relative to the KAP, is that like standard procedure now for most state agencies when they have hearings, or do some use that procedure and others not? And it seems to me that ought to be a required procedure for any agency who has hearings, but I'm a little confused about whether that is or not.
I can't speak to all agencies. Quite honestly, it seems like that's kind of become the default of going to agencies when there's a hearing is kind of the uniform process. I believe there's probably certain others out there that exist, but that's kind of the default for anything I've drafted in the last many years of if there's a dispute, it goes through the KAP.
Thank you for that clarification. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Adam, on Section 1, where it says that they may be served electronically, and that has to be authorized by the carrier. Is there any requirement currently that the carrier has to give an email?
Senator, I'm not aware of. I'd probably have to defer to Mr. Haney on that one again. I'm not aware of any requirement that they do or do not.
Okay. I just want to make sure, Mr. Chairman, that emails are voluntary. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions for Adam? Seeing none, we have first on the agenda, only one on the agenda, Mike Hamey.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. As stated, my name is Mike Hamey. I'm the Transportation Director for the Kansas Corporation Commission. First, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to brief your committee today on behalf of the staff of the KCC. I am here today as a proponent of House Bill 2007. And just a little bit of background, we testified on this bill last session. It was under House Bill 2524. I believe this committee did make one amendment, and that was for the motor carriers to have the ability to opt out of electronic notifications. That was the only amendment. So as the revisers, or Mr. Cybers indicated, this bill is technically just a cleanup bill. It removes a lot of the data language from the statutes that were reminiscent from before the motor carrier industry was deregulated. In that area, motor carriers assigned territories and authority to operate. It was often contested in hearings. These changes remove that type of language. The bill also cleans up and clarifies other statutes, but does not make any substantive changes. The bill will allow, as I said, motor carriers to opt out of the electronic notifications if they so desire. And these changes were made through a delivery process that involved discussions with our partners at the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, Kansas Highway Patrol, and the Kansas Motor Carriers Association. And for the record, Mr. Whitaker, Executive Director for the Motor Carriers Association, wanted me to make you aware that he is also a proponent of this bill. So to address the hearings a little bit, this was simply just to bring the hearings up to date. Since I've been at the commission, started in 2000, there has not been a hearing on the authority. That was, again, going back to deregulation in the mid-90s. Those were often contested because motor carriers really fought for the routes that they operated on. They controlled those. So hearings were often heard at that time. Since then, we have updated to conform to the Kansas Administrative Procedures Act, should there ever be the need for one. But as I mentioned, there hasn't been a hearing since 2000. And probably goes back to the deregulation era. And Mr. Chairman, this concludes my testimony. Appreciate the opportunity to testify before you here today, and I'd be more than happy to answer any other questions at the appropriate time.
Mr. Haney, Senator Pyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Haney, is there currently any requirement by the KCC that a carrier provide an email address?
Several years ago, in 2017, we implemented the Kansas Trucking Regulatory Assistance Network, KTRAN, and it allows us to interact with motor carriers. They can receive regulatory alerts. They can apply for authority, apply for driver waivers, things of that nature. There's also a lot of other information out there for them. In order to sign up in KTRAN, they do provide an email. If they choose not to that, then they just wouldn't have a KTRAN account. So it is somewhat voluntary, but if they want to participate in KTRAN, they do have to have that so that we can communicate back and forth. There's also that chat feature in KTRAN, which the industry has really taken advantage of, where they can actually chat with one of our office staff on specific questions related to authority or sometimes even safety.
But it is voluntary, right?
Yeah, if they don't want to have a KTRAN account, they just simply don't do that. But to have a KTRAN account, we do need an email so that we can communicate.
Any further questions? Senator Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mike, I noticed in the bill on the first page, line 30, that groundwater well drilling rigs is struck out. Just kind of curious, did that mean KCC used to somehow authorize those and no longer does?
No, what that does, sir, is we have tried to adopt regulations through our administrative regulation process so that motor carriers have one set of rules to go look for. And that's how we struck that from the statute, the definitions, as many as we can. Now, we still have a few statutes out there, or definitions in statute, KSA 66-1,108, which is our definition statute. But the majority of the definitions are adopted through our administrative regulation process, just to simplify the ability for motor carriers to identify where those rules or definitions are at. So that's why we did that, to be consistent.
So that those water well drilling rigs are defined in rules and regs then, not
That is
statute?
correct.
Gotcha. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
You're
Chairman.
welcome.
Committee, further questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Mike.
You're welcome.
We have any other proponents wishing to testify? Any neutrals? Any opponents? We'll close the hearing on House Bill 2007. With that, committee, we will be meeting next Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday with work. There's a possible presentation on Monday, and we may have to meet on Friday for a hearing, but we will be in session, it looks like, on the schedule on Friday anyway. With that, we are adjourned. Hold on. Next Friday. This Friday is no meeting.